Welcome to Innersight, Health Optimization with Rudy and Shaun.
Right, off we go with our next podcast. Shaun, welcome. I'll introduce our guest a little bit later. Just wanted to say we've had some great feedback from our previous podcast. So if you haven't listened to it or watched it on YouTube, it was actually our piece on how we run through our Innersight assessment and what you will see and what you will experience if you have that assessment. And then also we have got a great lineup, except for today. We've got a great lineup for our next few coming up. So yeah, we've had a good year in planning lives and planning health span of people.
Excellent. So I think today will be slightly different from the other podcasts, less health orientated. But on that subject, we're in the game of increasing health span. And we don't focus that much on if you're going to live longer, but if we can improve your health span, that might happen. And with that, certain things or certain concerns arises, and we're going to discover more concerns, and we're going to talk about these things with a financial planner or financial advisor or financial educator. Johan has got several degrees in this field, so we'll touch on that later on. But maybe let's just touch on health span. What is health span, and what is, how do we define it, basically, for people to understand?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a few words flying around at the moment: wellness, longevity, health span. So like we like to think about it as health span is we're going to try and move you to a very, very good 80-year-old. So as we think of how long people live, is we used to live like in our parents or our grandparents' age. 65 was a very good time to live, and then you retired, and the Bible says you die at 80, or you're very lucky to get to 80. We actually think you have to get to a very good 80. You have to plan your death to be around that time. Very unlucky, or something big has to happen, but the normal stuff you have to be able to put out of the picture, to be surprised on a Tuesday afternoon by a cancer diagnosis. That we don't think should happen anymore.
And hence the health span, we refer to the age where you're still healthy without disease as such.
Yeah, and I think that's where we have to bring in Johan. He needs to tell us how we're going to be different in a financial sense, because we now have talked for the last 12 episodes how we're going to be different in a health point from 65 to 80. But we need to plan our happiness around money.
Yeah, well, obviously, if we increase health span, there might be a side effect, and the side effect might be a longer lifespan. And I don't know if you suddenly live to 100. I don't think you've planned to live to 100 financially, especially if you retire at an early age. Your money might not last that long, and that's the type of things that we need to deal with. So that's why we brought Johan here today. So Johan, welcome.
Yeah, thanks guys.
So maybe, I'll take it over. Maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do day to day, and how you got into the space where you are today.
My day-to-day life consists of really purely investment management. So investment management in the form of fund management and the technical sides to that. So in terms of risk management, how do we achieve certain goals or mandates, as we call them. My background, however, is slightly different to that. So a background in investment management that spans about 25 years in various guises, managing, advising on pension funds, doing hedging strategies for insurance companies, also pension funds, even private high net worth portfolio management. So I spent a fair amount of my time there. And during that time, I started becoming more interested in the interpersonal relationship, or the advice side, as you would refer to, because now I had to suddenly sit in front of somebody and be responsible for the decisions we were making. Whereas, if you're somebody sitting in the dark room making purely investment decisions, it's sometimes difficult to imagine the effect it has on the people that are sitting in front of you.
Because most people are different. You haven't got a
Exactly.
cookie cutter that you can say
Yeah.
this person. So that's
Absolutely. I mean, I went from, formula-based, everything, fits into a box, until I started sitting in front of clients and say, oh, hang on, it's actually not that simple.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, yes, obviously when emotions come into play, then it makes it difficult actually. Because before that, you could make a purely data-driven decision, but now you need to take someone's emotions in mind in working in
Emotions,
that way.
I prefer to refer to or refer to emotions as your internal world rather. It's a bit more than emotions. Emotions that lead to behavior or habits that lead to behavior. And it's a lot more difficult to address the behavior than to address the result of a technical product and to construct that product. And that's where that kind of dissonance, and I started realizing that. So to that extent, I wouldn't say I did a hiatus, but I qualified then as a professional life coach. And it's not because I wanted to, move into that direction specifically. It was really for me to understand from an accountant, investment manager perspective, how does this actually work? So the best way was to actually immerse myself into that. And I'm still largely involved in that field. It made my life certainly a lot richer in understanding my habits and my behaviors. And bringing all of that together, and this is where we are today in terms of what I do also from a day-to-day basis. Other than managing the investments, it is reimagining the industry in where we can really make a difference, much like you guys do. So you come from a traditional medical field, you were taught in a certain way, and then you realized, hang on, there's something else going on here. And we're probably moving in parallel directions in that case. Where with a lot of other people, we're starting talking about how do we re-engineer the advice field so it actually matches what we deliver on a product basis. So those two talk together. And that is really, instead of saying, okay, and coming back to the subject, and I want to kind of pre-talk all the questions that we might want to address, but is to say that, this linear retirement age of whatever it is, 64, 65, it doesn't exist. It really is something that was cooked up by really clever marketing guys, and we need to reimagine that as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably what we need to say is we need to say, if we talk about how long you're going to live, we need to have an assumption when is retirement. And that's probably what you're aiming at, is retirement is not the same as it used to be.
Absolutely not.
But currently, most people still use that model, or are most people using new thinking techniques and extending the retirement age? No, most people still work on that 65 number.
It is a legacy system that wasn't put in place. And in simple terms, it really, where does the age come from? When was it introduced? And it was really came from the kind of urbanization, industrial age, where you had to stop working because you literally could not lift up whatever you had to lift up, or shift whatever thing you had to move to another place. And maybe we should do is just define three distinct ages. And so even prior to industrialization, we lived in an agrarian type of environment where it was clan-based. You were born into a farming family. You were self-sustaining. As a child, you started helping on the farm or toiling the fields at a very early age, and then you started really working hard on there, selling the stuff. And then as you became older, your role changed, and you started educating and looking after the kids again. So there was a whole life cycle. So with industrialization, people urbanized, moved away from that cycle, started working in factories, and what happened in terms of retirement specifically was that, so some of the, let's say it, more enlightened companies said, don't worry, we'll provide something every month, we'll deduct something from your salary, and when you retire, we'll take care of you. So that was typically called the defined benefit pension system. Okay.
Almost like our government system still now.
Very much like that. So But what it did was it forced you to stop working and then sit at home. That was basically it. And there was a very definite line.
And obviously the assumption was that you would live on average to a 65 or age of 65 for them to make the financial
I think
side work.
The irony is, I think the company, because it was on their balance sheet, so they were responsible. They were hoping that you died very soon after. So they didn't want you to become 80, that's for sure. That has changed, however. So very few, maybe still in the emerging world, and that's why we still have that in our environment by and large. But I think with the advent of, let's call it the knowledge economy. So we don't have to pick up. The only reason I pick up heavy stuff is because I listen to you guys. You tell me I need to exercise. So that's why I lift up heavy stuff. Other than that, I don't need to. This thing has to work. So from a knowledge perspective, there's no reason why I have to retire at a certain age. What I can do is to say, well, okay, until when do I actually want to have a productive life and start planning around the lifestyle I want to have at certain stages in my life? And this flows into, I think, the next type of section where we're going. So from a knowledge worker perspective, I think the concept of retirement as a definite point in time has dissolved. And we need to reconstruct how that advice actually works.
And on that point, I think there's very few people that at that age with their money accumulated will have the same standard of living or quality of life going forward. You need to reinvest that money and then live off it, and hopefully it will grow and not, you won't outlive that money. Yeah. I think that's one of the big problems, is that if we do live to 100 or even longer, then that might be the reality, is that you might outlive your money.
Well, not even 100. I think the stark reality is of, counting us included in that, is that in order to live passively of whatever money I could possibly squirrel together at a certain age is very, very difficult. Never mind going into 90s and 100s. So the cost of living, the burden on a lot of families supporting other families, specifically in South Africa. I would almost say that optimistically, we're talking about 95% of people cannot achieve that in South Africa and in the emerging world.
We also, in our country, a lot of our children leave the country. They go work overseas and other places. So I also think you might not have the support of your children supporting you when you reach that retirement age. As you said, in the historic ways it worked. Early days, you went into a cycle, and then at some point you looked after the children, and your children would look after you and stuff. That has changed a lot.
Dramatically. And it's not even a South African problem. I think globally that is something that's actually popped up. The converse of that's also starting to show, actually, is that a lot of children move back home. We kind of think, okay, the children are going to move out, and my cost of living is going to start decreasing. And at some stage, my cash flow burden will be less. So what we see happening is children moving back home because it's too expensive for them to actually move out on their own. So that dynamic is also changing, just incidentally. But I think also, just to that point, is I want to come back to something that's related to retirement, and that is the sense of financial freedom. So I think we should rather start planning for financial independence, financial freedom, more than retirement as a specific point in time. And the reason I say that is, if financial freedom, for instance, means for me that I can effortlessly look after my children and support them in whatever that they do, that is financial freedom. So I don't say that, it's a bad thing that children move back home. If that is what I want to do with my life, then I start planning my life and my life story around that. So that's basically what I'm saying now.
Okay. And I mean, it's obvious that almost the system, like people put the laptop in front of you and say you got to do this retirement planning, has changed. I mean, like our medicine, our Innersight looks a lot different than our sickness model that we've got in med school. So we're talking about a 25-year span, somewhere between 65 and 90, that someone has to plan. So if you now, let's say it's me coming to you, what would be the first questions that you would ask? How does that piece look? Because I mean, it's so new how this thinking is. I mean, I've never really accounted how you think.
Let's take the human aspect of that. Okay, you as a human being and the way you show up in the world. The first point of departure, and I think the mistake a lot of people make let's say we meet for the first time. The first thing I want to do as an advisor is tell you, listen, don't worry, I've got all the solutions for you. I've got all the answers. I know everything. Wrong. I think as an advisor, or the person that sits in front of you needs to accept that actually I don't know anything, and we'll figure it out together. And that's where sometimes we call it the expert model. So I look at the expert, and the expert needs to have all the answers. That puts the burden on me to give the result that you require. The solution to that, or the way it changes, is to say, well, how can we figure out together something that will work for you? So it also puts the responsibility of making a change.
And that's very similar to what we do as well.
100%.
In medicine, because it's also a discussion and say, but how would we change this together? Because we need to get the patient also on to take responsibility for what they're doing.
Correct.
And I think the old thinking was like, there's a tablet, take the tablet, it will make you better. That's
exactly.
wrong.
Yeah.
So that's very similar.
Very similar. So the point of departure is really to determine what is your state. Okay, state in terms of, are you in survival mode? Are you kind of getting by? Or are you sorted out? Kind of three simple stages or states that you can, obviously you can subdivide it into a lot of other stuff. But what I would do is to say, I could determine which state are you in. So if you are in crisis mode, it doesn't help that I sell you this 65 golden Labrador with my beautiful wife walking down, Blauberg Strand, with Tafelberg in the background. It's not going to work for you. I need to figure out what is the most logical step for you financially, and by that way, health, all the aspects of your life. So that's a coaching discussion. What is the logical next step for you to take? And that is what we work on. Forget about this halo moment in whenever that is. So let's just figure that out. And then the next step is to make sure, okay, so once we've made progress, so we get you out of trouble. So a lot of people don't want to look at debt counseling or consolidating debt, all that stuff. Let's figure that stuff out first before we even start thinking about saving money because the problem is, if this problem reoccurs again or continues occurring, whatever savings I have, and this is the problem I have with this 3-pot system at the moment. So I sit with this problem. The first time I have a significant amount of money and I can get my hands on it, guess what I'm going to do?
You're going to
feed it into this monster problem again.
Yeah. Just for our listeners out there, if you can tell us what the 3-pot system is again. So
it is new legislation that came out actually very recently. So in the pension fund legislation, which before you were basically very restricted in terms of how much of your pension fund money you could actually access. So the 3-pot system, in very simple terms, is now you can have actually access to a large amount, and the rest can be invested in a certain way. And there's maybe a discussion that we can have at a different time and how that actually works. And the other one you're not allowed to touch at all. So suddenly, in a lot of people's worlds, a lot of capital will become available. Yet they sit with crisis mode. So if I don't address that. So that's coming back to your point. The next step, okay, so let's say, for instance, okay, you were in crisis mode. We managed to sort all your stuff out, and now you're in kind of getting by. The first thing you need to do is make sure that you don't regress again back into crisis mode. Very similar to what. So the guy was in ICU. So the first thing as a medical practitioner is to prevent that the guy goes back into it. So infection and all those things. So that's what we have to do in terms of financial advice as well. So that's where unforeseen expenses, for instance, medical expenses, insurance. So there we start looking at, okay, are you adequately insured so you don't have to all of a sudden make a lump sum payment to kind of get you back to where you're supposed to be it healthcare, be it short-term insurance, whatever that is, and make sure that you're covered there. Again, if you're in crisis mode and you start paying insurance, what's the first thing people stop paying when you're in trouble? Insurance. Okay. So that's the aspect of human behavior that's often neglected. Only once you are then kind of securely in balance do we start to look at, okay, how do we get you in a state where you live the life that you plan to do? So none of the retirement conversation comes in there. If it is your choosing that you want to retire at a certain stage, then be it so. I think in many cases, and I think from your perspective, what you also see is that people say, well, 65, I'm actually still fine. I can work. And let's say in my case where I'm kind of mid-50s and I realize I'm going okay, a niggle here or there as everybody does, but the odds are that at 64 or 65, I can still have a productive life. So already now I need to start planning. So here's now where the expense planning comes in. Do I now say, do I rather than start allocating more of my cash flow into making sure that I'm okay when I'm 65? So I can then pursue that third career that I want to, or whatever I want to do. So your financial planning then entails, okay, what is it where I want to go and what I want to achieve? So be it, okay, now let's say I want to become a coach. So let's start educating myself now. And similar to in your field is that when you get there and you think you want to make a change, it's already too late. So these are kind of education, re-education, aligning yourself to where you want to be and changing my behavior towards that takes a long time.
So if I take you back, you said about 98% of people will struggle to have a good retirement. So in that 3 models that you just said, a lot of people are actually doing retirement planning, but they're still in ICU. But do I understand you correctly? So people are selling them a product, but they shouldn't have been there. They should be sorting out debt or something else first.
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
Yeah, and that is the, let's call it the halo kind of golden glow type of product advertisements that we see. We spoke about it a while ago. The interesting thing is about, I used the analogy of, I forgot when it was, but we know exactly every inch of the moon we've explored. Mars, we've got it covered thanks to Elon. Most of the other planets in our universe, our solar system, we pretty much got that figured out as well. We have several actually man-made objects that's gone interstellar. In other words, it's left our solar system, and we're exploring stuff that's out there. Now, guess how many of what's the territory of our oceans we've discovered or explored? About 30%.
Oh.
And then I use that analogy. It's easier to look for solutions out there. It's much more difficult to start looking for the solutions in here. And that's mostly what actually drives or should drive financial advice. Is what is my emotional state or the internal state that I have? And how do I change that in order to get to where I want to be?
And that should actually happen very early in life. And I think it's also in medicine, it's also like in preventative health, you need to actually in your 20s, 30s, think of your health when you're going to be 80. You don't want to smoke when you're 20, 30, 40, because that's going to affect you later in life.
Go to the beach with
very
baby
similar.
oil.
Yeah, exactly. Get that melanoma.
The interesting thing is, though, if you sort out this ICU stuff, as you call it, first, I mean, if you live longer and you have the power of compound interest later in life, I mean, if you start early and you can fix this early, that ball will keep rolling for you later. If you
100%.
If you sort that out early enough. So it's almost the same as we've been talking about. We want to start testing people late 20s, early 30s. That's golden time.
Yeah.
To start fixing. I mean, we've had people that at 47 the screening was too late, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's damage control, and it's much more difficult to do damage control. And go forward from there. Um,
Yeah.
so
Also,
actually, at
yeah.
some point, I mean, to get the youngsters in and to educate them how to manage the money, that's so important.
A lot of what we do is to really think about how do we reach that client base early. Let's call it, from a MBA speak perspective. That segment. So a lot of what we do with our digital marketing team that we have is how do we communicate with those, let's say the early bloomers, late 20s, mid 20s, that kind of environment. And then the interesting thing that we do see is that it's across. It doesn't matter which race you are. They tend to want to do things more by themselves. So autonomy is a lot more important to them. So how do we give that into their hands and say, how do we help you make decisions? And that's an interesting shift that's happened from, even when I was young. When I was in my mid-20s, I was still relied on, the grown-ups for advice. The young people don't want to do that anymore. So how do you package that and enable them to make the right
obviously
decisions?
that market is then where artificial intelligence and
Absolutely.
connectivity and digitalized and all the aspects will play into, and they might have a better planning than us going forward.
The trick there is to be more discerning about the data that you get.
I suppose.
Yeah, so don't look at all the YouTube channels. Some are good, some are less good. And that is where I think the education part comes in. This is okay. A lot what we want to do is to say, well, and that goes across all age groups. Funny enough, I think the older population is a bit more gullible nowadays because we tend to believe what, let's call it, experts say. And when somebody tells you they are an expert,
Probably not.
Yeah. The X is a has been, a spurt is a drip under pressure. But, okay, so a lot of what we are wanting to do and aiming to do is to say, well, this is the important stuff. Keep your eye on this ball and forget about the noise. It doesn't matter. I'm very cautious in terms of who to use as an example, but whichever figurehead you see on the news, it actually doesn't really matter what that person is saying. Look at the real stuff. Look at fundamental drivers of market performance at the moment. And that is what we do, to kind of lift that and say, okay, enhance that and say, and then start analyzing that. I think it's very similar in what you're doing. So you get a lot of snake oil supplements and whatever there is in the market. And what you guys are doing in terms of, okay, hang on, you see this report we are producing, and I've been the fortunate recipient of one of those, and you do great work, is to say, okay, this is the important stuff. If you improve these metrics, you'll be okay. And what do I do around that? Similar with financial planning.
Okay, let's make it a little bit more practical. So someone in there, they are 25. What do they do? Someone 35, what do they do? Someone 45. So in those three pockets. So a 25-year-old is difficult for him to get into ICU yet unless he's really had access to a lot of debt. But from there, I'm just guessing. I mean, we are here learning from you.
No. I smile because, even through the work I do with myself and on myself, I recognize that the patterns I've put in place were actually way before then. Life events that you have as a 4-year-old, life events that you have as a 13-year-old, and how that determines those recurring patterns, even now as a mid-50-year-old. And I go back and I look at myself and I go, it's so obvious. And that's coming back to the practical advice is, how do we change that conversation? And then sit in front of you as a person and say, okay, let's unpack that. And the thing is, in coming back to the ocean and the kind of interplanetary analogy, is that the advice environment is built around wanting to give you a solution and wanting to take you away from your misery. The problem with these conversations and the practical side is you have to have a look at your misery and then work with that, because otherwise that pattern keeps on recurring And you can play the lotto, think of the next big scheme, it's going to recur. Unless you're extremely lucky. That's the point I want to make. It won't make a
it's
difference.
so aligns to what we do. I mean, you've got the genetics. The genetics will keep happening unless you actually do something about it. I mean, diabetes runs in families, heart disease runs in families, cancers run in families. So unless you see it coming, you have to act on it. And if you ask me for my advice about you now, I'll have to say, but I need to see the data. I need to see your blood results. I need to see your previous history, family history, all that. So, and I think the main thing for us is you have to move. That's the one thing. So you've obviously got stay out of ICU. So that's the big thing. Don't trap yourself in a lot of debt. We say don't smoke and move. That's the big things.
I think you mentioned debt now as well. So debt, again, is not necessarily a bad thing. Used incorrectly, it becomes troublesome. Let's put it that way. What I refer to is more the and even what I'm thinking of whilst you were saying that. So I think you can delineate that back into health issues as well. And how many health issues are born out of? I'm actually busy reading a book. It's about Bruce Lee's philosophy. I never thought he was a philosopher, but his daughter now wrote this book, The Way of the Water. And she was telling the story that when her father died, now Bruce Lee, it was in Hong Kong. And on that day, she was sad and somebody gave her a candy bar. And that made her feel better. And she was like 4 or 5 years old. On that day that habit was born that a candy bar will make me feel better. Because that grown-up told me that it's going to be so. And it took a long time to actually figure out, okay, my weight issues, I can exercise as much. And it goes well for a while. And then I fall back to that almost archaic habit of mine. So unless you don't go back and change that and recognize for what it is and realize, okay, how do I now change that? And this is the interesting thing about what we're doing. And Shaun, I think we've had that conversation before, is that to isolate, let's call it the human side of financial advice and put that under the umbrella of financial advice would be a disservice to what you're actually doing. It is coaching in general. And that affects you in financial behavior, health behavior, relationship behavior, your profession, what you do in your job, all those things. We tend to just use finance as a gateway into that. And that's where the finance industry needs to shift in terms of their thinking.
The mindset change. For us as well, people need to get on board, share the thinking, the culture of preventative health as well.
Yeah.
And very similar to what you're saying now is that you need to engage at that level to get them to be on board and take responsibility.
Absolutely. So this we are. You remind me now what Lance Armstrong, bless his soul, he says something, or he wrote a book and he called It's Not About the Bike. You do mountain biking. And the message I give is, and Shaun from time to time.
When I didn't fall off the bike.
Yeah. And I always want to say is that investments and financial planning, it's not about the bike. You know, what we do as an investment manager, I cannot think of a better way or a more grander way of investing than my predecessors. I can do it more efficiently and I can start using machine learning to make better decisions. But investments in itself, like medicine, there's not much to change there. It's commoditized, and it will become more commoditized as we progress with technology.
And that part of the equation will probably be taken over by technology completely.
Absolutely. Well, what I do, my 10-year plan is not investment manager over 10 years, because that job will not exist anymore. As simple as that. And that's the stark reality of it in terms of making investment decisions and pushing a button in order to get a certain result. Even today, what we do, I mean, the sheer amount of data I can process with a little box, it's fascinating. And I spend a lot of time looking at that. So what we do is to say, okay, how do we produce a product that suits a lot of people, but we start then integrating that with I have trouble calling it coaching because people tend to think that you
shy away
it's
from
almost
the
like
word.
it's almost like wellness.
Wellness is like kaftan, wearing kaftans and toe rings.
Yeah,
it's a very serious topic.
We hate the word wellness. It's like
yeah. So, for lack of a better word, but let's call it coaching. To integrate those two, that's where the challenge lies, and that's where we spend a lot of time. So, and the more difficult part is, and incidentally, we talk about technology. I think even the advice, the technical aspects of that. We all know about ChatGPT now, and everybody's raving about that. There's my view on that is the majority of questions I receive on a daily basis about investments and advice. We'll be able to do that pretty soon, just using that interface. Kind of call it advice GPT, whatever you want to call it. You train a large language model on. Actually, I think it's JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley that did that. They took all their advice, all their research, and trained large language models and GPT models on that. So you basically have the history of whatever they said since their beginning on tap. And I think similarly, we'll be able to do that. So that's kind of the reinvention of robo-advice like we know it. So from an advice perspective, it's really the human side of it. So how do we as humans then assist people to make decisions and do that inner work?
And that's exactly what's going to happen in medicine as well. It's very similar to in our field. We'll use the technology to just digest all the data out there, and then you need to interact with the human.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because I mean we will try and keep the human engine going as long as we can, but what you're actually planning is, I mean, wealth should be around you, and it should just stop being a worry that you can actually live. That's pretty much what you're saying, is like make the human live, that he doesn't have to worry about this pot drying up. So exactly. Celebrate the artist, celebrate the teacher, and all of them. They can. It shouldn't be thinking about, I want to be the next Elon Musk. You want to have this pot moving with you and have the human go. It's like, and maybe we're thinking a little bit too much about trying to be the next billionaire, but instead just be what you were placed here to be. Like, just,
you made me think. Maybe what you say is, how can I be the next millionaire?
Millionaire.
Yeah. That's really what we're trying to do.
You're worrying all the time. I mean, no one that's in that space where you say you have to get out. You have to get someone out of the hole. And then you're planning for the future. I mean, it sounds great.
So many people in ICU, in that setting, with the interest rates and with the economy and everything. I mean,
well, here's the fascinating thing about that. So the impact financial stress has on you is the same as a lion jumping out of you. That cortisol pickup or build up is exactly the same, and that's why people end up in ICU. It's the physiological impact these let's call it hormones have. So a lot of what we do is decreasing that, because the thing is that happens from a neuro perspective, which we're very aware of. So when you're in ICU, your focus narrows to survival. You cannot think of other possibilities. So from the discussion I'm describing is, okay, how do I narrow that view so you can think of other possibilities that you were not able to do before?
Yeah.
So that's the next step with you really sitting in front of me and say, okay, we've sorted these things out. And it's okay, let's just widen your field now. And say, okay, hang on, I never thought of that. And when somebody says that to me, I go, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Because we're moving from, oh, hell, I'm now 58. I need to be 65, and I'm short about 12 million rand.
So that's in my mind the first thing there is to remove that number, remove the 65, the number out of the equation, and look at the person and say, okay, but what's your health like? Are you healthy? You could work till 75 if you want. You know, don't need to work as hard as you worked in your 30 to 50 years, but you can do like 3 days a week. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, and if you have enough, and I mean, the 4% drawdown is a big thing in the old retirement.
Yeah.
If you don't draw enough, then your pot's going to get bigger over time. It's not going to get smaller. So it's quite interesting. And
hence also, I mean, yes,
I love that the pockets, because I don't think people have been oversold this
the halo moment.
The halo moment, and I think that's if the one thing that I've learned today is that halo moment is for a lot of people. They're planning that, but they don't realize that there's other steps.
It's, you know, the Men's Health front cover guy. Show me how many people look like that. I can have a Men's Health front cover retirement guy. Just as many people that retire comfortably, passively, with a lifestyle that they had before. That's the amount of people that get onto that front cover. That's basically the analogy we can use. For the rest of us, we need to hustle. The thing is, and what I sometimes do is to say, well, okay, how do you value your job? Your current income stream. Let's say you earn, R1 million a year. That's your, whatever you take home. I don't know. How do you value that? It's okay. If you had to have a passive pot of money, and call it a bond. You put all your money in a bond. How much would you have in order to draw 1 million rand a year? So currently that figure is quite easy because it's divided by 0.1, because our kind of the bond rate's more or less 10%.
Yeah.
So that is 10 million rand. So what you're doing is kind of discounting the value of what you already have. It's okay. How do we now make sure that over 10 years' time, the value of your 10 million rand at least stays the same, or how do we educate it that it becomes 20 million rand? So that's a different form of thinking about retirement. So that's one bit that just came up. The other one is to say, okay, and exactly what you alluded to. So, okay, the drawdown factor. So people think, oh, okay, I can't retire, or I can't have that life I want to have. Funny enough, a lot of people after 2 years realize that's not the life they wanted to have, and they start taking up golf and stuff like that. But anyways, so is there a way to substitute that drawdown and preserve my capital? So eventually, once we now start getting into balance and kind of looking to progress, that's the discussion we have there. And say, all right, so we are there now. Do you realize that, but just by doing as you said, three days a week consulting job that you can do remotely, by the way, in Amsterdam, don't need to sit there, you can sit here. You can earn a reasonable amount of money and not dip into your capital. That is a very good solution. So those are the discussions we're having.
That's amazing. And I think it's amazing with this, as we had the discussion, how much this aligns to what we do. Like try and catch people early to have a little view on where they are. So I mean that's pretty much what you say. It's just say where you are, and then see what things can hit you from the side. So plan that things don't rock you off your trail.
It's exactly what we do. I mean, we see the red flags and then say, okay, right, this year we're going to sort red flags. Once we've sorted the red flags, then you say, okay, now we can breathe a little bit. So let's work on some of the other factors that you can do something about. And that's really similar to the model that you've explained now. It aligns quite well.
In your terms, it's similar to, you have an obese patient. And then what the current I don't want to be dissing people, but what a lot of financial advice sells you is, okay, you're 300 kilogram obese, life expectancy of not too much, we are going to send you on a yoga retreat. It's not going to work. Let's just kind of baby steps.
Absolutely. I like it.
Yeah.
What are you busy with at the moment? Anything interesting?
Oh, there's
It's quite a few.
Quite a few. You're planning for that
Yeah,
extended, not to
yeah.
retire
No, I
time.
was joking the other day. So this so messes with my 4-hour work week. I had grandiose plans, but it didn't come to fruition. But no, I think in the product space, we recently launched South Africa's first global macro multi-asset actively managed ETF. So it's quite a mouthful, and it's due to regulations that we have to do that. We call it AQUA. It's called the Adaptive Quantitative Allocation ETF. I think I had maybe one glass too many red wine when I thought of that abbreviation. I thought it was cute. But it does exactly that. So it really, what we're doing is to move away from bells and whistles stuff and say, okay, listen, if you want to have a core component in your portfolio that you can just contribute to, and it will give you that steady growth. Not Bitcoin, not some scheme because you're 58 and you have to double your money by 64. It is really, if you start early, and this is exactly the market we're looking at, this is like kind of the 25-year-old, a little bit older. What can I contribute to give me that compound growth, steady growth over time? And it's like a unit trust that's actually listed on the JSE. So that talks to something else, which is accessibility. So it's easily accessible. Any stockbroker you have, you can go and buy it. So that I'm very excited about that. So it's early days. We launched it in December last year. It looks really promising. It does what it's supposed to do. That's what we do. We test it and we make sure that everything's fine. Kind of up the value chain, we are actively involved with a few of the advisors and what they call discretionary fund managers. So those are the DFMs that work with advisors to build awareness with advisors around exactly this conversation. So do you realize you can actually make a change in your clients' lives other than just selling products?
I love it.
Yeah, so Marius, you know very well. We spend a lot of time on that. Yeah,
I love it.
And if someone has listened to this and they want to get in touch, how do they get in touch with you?
yeah.
Have you got a website? Have you got an email address they can?
So get hold of me. So our website is www.numoro, numoro.co.za. So it's either Numoro or Numoro. I have many of these moments.
We'll link it onto
Link
the
it there.
onto the
and
notes.
otherwise,
that they can
email
click
address Johan with 2 N's at numero.co.za. Just add it there. I'm glad to get feedback, interact, ideas, criticism. Everything works. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent.
on. That was amazing.
Thanks, Johan. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for your time inviting me. It's been fun.
Yeah, great. See you next month.
Yeah.
Disclaimer. This podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of your healthcare provider. No doctor-patient relationship has been formed through this podcast. The content here is for information purposes only.